Hi, everyone. This is John Davisson from the Electronic Privacy Information Center, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, as always, Kerry Parker, and this is episode 211 for March 15th, 2021. And as I'm sure you've noticed, we now have taglines. Or at least I think that's what they call them. That's like the classic radio show thing, like, hey, this is Mick Jagger, and you're listening to Rock 104, or, whatever. Rock 104, by the way, is my favorite rock and roll station from Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I grew up. I don't even know what it's doing now. But quick digression. I actually had a chance to meet Doc West, he's been a Fort Wayne institution for years on the classic rock radio station, and actually knew somebody. It was my uncle's brother who was the program director there. So I had a chance to go visit the station when I was a kid. And this was like, early high school or something. And I thought it was just the coolest thing. Anyway, somehow or other, I managed to get together with Doc West at the thing and took a picture with him and my two daughters. A picture I will treasure. They probably have no idea who it was, but we got a chance to actually go in the radio studio and see a Fort Wayne institution. Anyway, long digression, but back to the tagline thing. So yeah, I decided when I'm going to start doing some bonus content for my patrons on Patreon and some bonus questions, which by the way, there will be for this interview. I also thought, well, it'd be kind of cool to get some taglines. So I'll be sprinkling those around here and there. And this one obviously is very appropriate because today we're talking to John Davisson from Epic. And, but I'll reuse these from time to time, and I think I'm going to reach out to some of my past guests and see if I can get some taglines from them too, and just throw a little fun into this. So we're going to be talking about what we call hiretech, HIRETECH, technology for hiring people, basically. And can you imagine, applying for a job remotely via some video thing, but you're not even talking to a human. You're just talking to a computer. And what they're basically claiming is that these automated systems that they've created with, AI or artificial intelligence, the buzzword of the day, can evaluate these candidates for you and help you screen them for things like, cognitive skills and communication abilities and even emotional intelligence. You wouldn't believe some of the things they're claiming they can do just by analyzing how people respond to a given set of questions. And as you might imagine, anything automated in this sort of way could have built-in biases or could just be flat out wrong. And when people are trying to get a job, this has serious consequences. And as soon as you start automating things, then you have to start thinking about, well, can this system be gamed? Will people figure out what the algorithms are and find ways to defeat them or, make themselves look better than they really are by, manipulating the way they act to game the system. So anyway, it's a whole new world when it comes to hiring, and things like facial recognition and tools that watch facial expressions and listen to the way you speak and, judge by where you're looking and how quickly you respond and how often you say or pause or, they're trying to automate ways to look at all these things and judge people by how they respond to these questions. So anyway, fascinating and creepy all at the same time. And so that is going to be the subject of our interview today. Part one will be broken up into two as kind of normal. So part two will be next week. But let's get right to it. Let's get to our interview with John Davisson from the Electronic Privacy Information Center. John Davisson is Senior Counsel at the Electronic Privacy Information Center, or EPIC, in Washington, D.C., where he's worked for a wide range of privacy, consumer protection, surveillance, and open government cases. John's a Baltimore native and has worked as a journalist before entering the law. Thank you so much for coming on the show, John.
Thanks so much, Kerry.
I think this is the first time I've had somebody on from Epic, which is great. I've been wanting to talk to you guys. You guys are doing such great work, and I've been wanting to reach out for a long time. I did talk to Lorraine Kisselberg, which we've established somebody you have worked with before. But I think you're the first Epic proper, someone that I've gotten to. So,
well, I'm happy to be a trailblazer.
Oh, great! Yes, I would hope this is the first of a long string. But since it's kind of new, why don't we start by explaining, what is Epic about? How do they come to be, and what is your role at Epic?
Sure. So Epic is a public interest research center based in Washington, D.C. We were established in 1994 to focus public attention on emerging privacy and civil liberties issues, and to protect privacy, freedom of expression, and democratic values in the information age, which we are, of course, all in. Epic pursues these goals through a number of different avenues. We do policy work, we do public education, litigation, put out a number of publications, and general advocacy. And I am senior counsel at Epic. I've done a variety of work in my time there. I've been there a little over 4 years now, including open government litigation, but more recently work on consumer protection and data privacy and data protection in the private sector.
Well, those are all things that we love to talk about in the show. So, in particular, I ran across an article recently about hiretech, and that's HIRETEC, kind of a buzzword, which we'll get into. In particular, which Epic was quoted because you've got some specific work you guys are doing in that area, which we'll get to again shortly. But so let's start off. What is hiretech? And then there's a particular company called HireView that you have been working with. It's not the right word. That you've been working on, maybe. And so maybe talk about, what do they do? How does it operate? And what is it claims it can do?
Sure. So hiretech generally, I don't know if there's a single uniform definition, but it refers to a sort of suite of products used to screen job applicants based on algorithmic decision-making or AI. And HireView is one of the most prominent examples of this. And I'll say up front, we don't know exactly how it operates, and that is one of the problems that we're going to get into in a moment here. But the core of its technology is opaque to the public, but I can walk you through the basic operation of the system, certainly. It's one of a number of AI hiring platforms that employers can contract with to help them screen job applicants. Others include Shine, Yellow, and Harvard is the other one that comes to mind.
Okay.
So there are others in the field, but HireView, I believe, is the biggest player in this market. These platforms vary a little bit in the details, but HireView's system consists of a mix of video-based assessments and game-based assessments. So let's say that you are applying for a job at a company that uses HireView. Typically, you'll be asked to set up a remote assessment. You can do this sort of on your own time. So this is one of the advertised benefits of this system. And it's going to be conducted automatically. You're not going to meet, at least in the first instance, with a human being. You're going to be answering questions to a computer that's asking you questions while it's capturing video and audio through your computer. So it'll ask questions that I think that I should clarify, there are sort of out-of-the-box prefab assessments that you can, if you're a company hiring HireView, you can use those. Or they also will do custom assessments, and they can tailor those to what you say are the particular needs of the position that you're hiring for or your company or so forth. But the common questions in those prefab assessments are ones that you would encounter in a job interview, things like, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? When did you work as part of a team that failed? Or, sort of very familiar job interview type questions. As you're answering those questions, HireView is, as I mentioned, capturing the video through your webcam and audio through your computer microphone. And it is scanning that data and analyzing it to detect certain things that it considers to be positive or negative indicators. And we often don't know what those are because HireView does not disclose all of the factors that it considers in these interviews, and the system is largely opaque. But we know it includes things like intonation, keywords, vocabulary, bodily movements, and currently still facial movements. So that's the video-based assessment. And the other piece, and different employers use a mixture of video and game-based assessments, one or the other or both. But in a game-based assessment, you'll be asked to play through small puzzle games similar to what you might download on your phone that are they're designed supposedly to measure your mental agility and your cognitive ability. It's an interesting system. And my understanding, I don't think this has changed. This was the case as of a couple of years ago anyway, is that it's a progressive system where you you start with a game, and if you do well, it might route you to a harder game. If you don't do well, it's going to send you sort of down the easier track. So there's a bit of a sorting mechanism at that stage already.
Wow.
So, okay, so you've got your video and maybe your game-based assessments, and then using these two tools and the personal data that it's extracting from these assessments, HireVue claims that it can measure a really wide range of things about a job applicant. Cognitive skills, communication, adaptability, responsibility, emotional intelligence, psychological traits, social aptitude, all sorts of these things. And by the way, this is not just me making these terms up. This comes directly from HireVue's marketing materials.
Oh my.
So they make a lot of pretty bold claims about what they can measure through the system. And then based on that analysis, it will produce an assessment score, which is available to the company that's using HireVue services. It'll place the applicant in a tier, sort of, we think this is a very qualified applicant, a less qualified applicant. I don't know the exact terminology because I've never used the back end, but that's the rough configuration. And from there, it's up to the person who's doing the hiring whether to advance that applicant, to reject that applicant, or maybe even to hire the applicant outright based on that initial screening. And they can, we're told, access the video of the candidate's interview, though I would imagine often, especially companies that are hiring at scale, those videos are never actually looked at for most candidates. The company is really just relying on that assessment that the system has cranked out. So that is the basic workflow for HireVue.
Wow. And so that obviously sets up a lot of the questions we're going to get to today, which I knew it would. So in 2019, you guys, Epic that is, filed a complaint against HireVue, alleging that this system to assess the candidates, video interviews constituted, quote unquote, unfair and deceptive trade practices. Can you elaborate on that and tell us what the status of that is?
Yeah, so a little legal background here, and I'll try not to bore your listeners too much. Federal law, and I believe the laws of every state, prohibit businesses from engaging in unfair and deceptive trade practices. And these terms have technical legal definitions, and I'm gonna read one off to you because I think it's sort of important to get the flavor of that.
Sure, yeah.
So, for example, under the Federal Trade Commission Act, that's the federal law governing unfair and deceptive trade practices, a practice is unfair if it, quote, causes or is likely to cause substantial injury to consumers, which is not reasonably avoidable by consumers themselves, and not outweighed by countervailing benefits to consumers or to competition. So that's a lot of jargon, but the bottom line is that under the FTC Act, a company can't lie to consumers because that's deceptive, and it can't coerce consumers into a situation that's going to be harmful to them, especially if there is no demonstrable offsetting benefit to consumers. So that's the basic authority that we're working under. Now, Epic files a lot of complaints with the FTC, urging the commission to take action against companies that engage in unfair and deceptive practices with respect to privacy and personal data practices. So we've in the past gone after Google on a number of occasions, Facebook, Uber, Zoom, Airbnb, for various practices that we believed were unfair or deceptive. When we learned about HireVue a couple of years ago, it was immediately clear that certain of its practices fell under this heading of unfair or deceptive. So, for example, it's collecting huge amounts of personal data from job applicants, whether the applicant really wants to have that data collected or not.
Right.
It's retaining and processing that data and making determinations based on factors that are not divulged to the applicants. It's sorting applicants based on a system that hasn't been publicly validated. And then importantly, and I assume we'll talk more about this, it was falsely representing that it doesn't use facial recognition. And HireVue has played some games with this in the past, trying to split hairs and avoid admitting that it uses facial recognition because I gather the company knows that that's a somewhat toxic term and can invite regulatory scrutiny. But what it's publicly describes that it is doing, which is analyzing facial data from applicants, fits right under the FTC's definition of facial recognition. So that was sort of a dead to rights claim. Like they said they didn't use facial rec, but they admitted to all of the elements of facial recognition elsewhere.
So now they actually changed their, I don't know, their marketing literature or something in response to your suit, right? I mean, so they dropped some of their claims or maybe altered some of their claims. Maybe this is a splitting hairs thing you're talking about as a result of your complaint, correct?
So one minor clarification: it's a complaint as opposed to a suit. We're not pursuing litigation against them in court. We're filings with the FTC. They have, it's hard to identify a single cause for this because there's been a lot of public outcry around their use of facial recognition. But I would certainly imagine our complaint played a role in this. They recently announced that they would halt using facial analysis in their interviews moving forward. This is a change that's going to take effect over time. So they haven't immediately stopped using this, especially I think the custom-built versions of their platform are going to continue using facial recognition for some time, but they are phasing it out. And that's a big deal. That's, to see HireVue respond to public pressure that way. And I think also increasing skepticism and growing amounts of legislation around facial recognition is probably enough to scare a company like HireVue off unless it really sees a clear, tangible benefit in using the technology. And it seems like it didn't here. So it dropped that or is going to drop it over time. However, that doesn't quite solve the problem because what they continue to say they'll continue to do is use voice analysis and analysis of bodily movements on screen. So not facial recognition, but still using that video. And those suffer from a lot of the same problems that facial recognition technology do in terms of being unreliable, being prone to bias, being ableist in particular.
Yeah, right.
This is a concern that Lydia X.E. Brown at the Center for Democracy and Technology has spoken about a lot, very, very eloquently. These systems really place disabled persons at a great disadvantage because, they rest on this idea that there is such a thing as sort of typical movement patterns, typical behaviors, typical modes of communication. And by definition, disabled persons are going to move and behave and communicate in atypical ways. So they've made a big change, but it's not. It doesn't solve the many problems with their system.
And this is something else we talked about recently with the Electronic Frontier Foundation on this show, and that is, my daughters, both in college right now, are with COVID, are having to. At least one of my daughters in particular, has to install one of these really intrusive, special proctoring browsers when she takes tests, and with similar sorts of technology where they're trying to, is she looking off to the side, like perhaps down at a phone to cheat, or is there someone else in the room, or even in I've heard that in some cases in classes, in these remote classes, they want to know, are people paying attention? Are they looking actually in the camera? Does it look like they're doing something else? And this is being rolled out, I think, during COVID times in particular, in a lot more places. It'd be and it's really super creepy.
Carrie, it's so interesting that you brought that up because that's been one of the projects Epic has been working on the past couple of months is around remote test proctoring systems. And we actually filed a complaint with the DC Attorney General, so the state level Attorney General in DC, against 5 of the major online test proctoring firms, highlighting a lot of the same types of unfair and deceptive and unlawful practices that we had previously highlighted in the HireVue complaint. And there it's in HireVue, in that situation, maybe there's an argument in some circumstances that if you don't want to be subjected to AI screening, well, you could just apply to the next job instead of applying to this firm. I think that's not always a great argument because often, lots of large employers in the same field use this technology. So I think there's not always a realistic opportunity to opt out. But in an educational setting, there's really no opportunity to opt out. You can't, you're not going to, forego your tuition for the semester because you don't like the fact that an instructor is using Proctorio or ProctorU. So you're stuck using that technology and it's tough luck for you. So I think all of the same concerns that we've raised in the hiretech setting are magnified in the educational setting. Yeah.
And as you were talking about this, it really struck me that, and I've got to ask, so do these companies, and we'll stick with HireVue in this case, do they save this data? Like, let's say It's a small world when so as an engineer, let's say I'm interviewing at several high tech companies because I want a job, Facebook, Google, Apple, whatever. Let's say hiretech actually contracts with multiple of these places. Can they share data? Like, can they say, oh yeah, we've seen this guy before? I mean, maybe I'm sure that for a particular company they can't give you the video because that would be somewhat proprietary. I'm sure they've got license to it, but can they say, yeah, we've not. This guy's going to use your system today, but we've got this guy in the system. This person, male or female, doesn't have to be a guy, and they've interviewed through our technology before, and we have records. Do they do that? Do they compile a dossier on you? And then second, I've got to ask: whenever you talk about data, do they sell any of this stuff out the back door for any other purposes?
So it's a good question. I honestly don't know whether these companies are building dossiers that operate across multiple employers. I would guess generally not, just because of the potential legal and regulatory problems that could create. But I don't know that. I don't know that for a fact. I mean, I honestly don't know what HireVue, how it collates the data that it collects. And as far as selling to third parties, I would have to check HireVue's privacy policy. My guess is they represent that they don't do that. That is often, I mean, it's obviously important that they not do that. That is often something that companies like HireVue will point to as evidence that they take your privacy seriously. And it is a piece of an effective privacy framework. But if you are still exploiting and using personal data for the benefit of your clients or even a particular client and retaining that data to sort of develop your algorithm, there's a lot of privacy harm that's happening at that stage. And it's not just a question of whether your data is also being sold to third parties. Right. But so I confess I don't know off the top of my head, but I would guess that HireVue does not actually do that.
Well, they may not make it public. I just know that if there's one thing I find that whenever we start to dig into the privacy use of data, these companies love to double and triple dip on this stuff. It's our capital society, and their shareholders are pushing them to make more and more money. And if you're sitting on all this data, and of course they'll claim that they anonymize it or de-identify it in some way or aggregate it. Those are all euphemisms for other, giving us other opportunities to work around our privacy policy to still milk your data for money. And
certainly to the extent that HireVue is using interview after interview to refine its model, and that data is being baked into the algorithm, then it is certainly exploiting your data in that way, and using it for commercial gain to sell its product to other companies that want to use its hiring services. Yes, so in that sense, absolutely. I don't know whether HireVue specifically double dips or triple dips to also sell data to other companies, but not that I'm aware of, I'll say.
Right. Okay, so HireVue actually went to the trouble of conducting a third-party audit of their system. I don't know if this is a response to some of the things you did or not, or maybe just kind of good practice where they wanted, look, we got this independent third party, and according to them, which is a big, caveat, they said that this audit came back and backed up a lot of the claims, I guess, of the efficacy of their product or their techniques. So first of all, what actually did this audit find, and second, can we trust that the audit was legitimate or not biased? A lot of times these companies, hire somebody and they're paying the bill, so a lot of times the results tend to be rosy.
Yeah, so I'll sort of answer those questions in reverse. The audit was conducted by a firm called Orca, and it's run by Kathy O'Neill, who is the author of Weapons of Math Destruction.
Interesting.
She fantastic author and advocate.
Yeah.
And has, if you haven't read Weapons of Math Destruction, I recommend it to your listeners. It came out, I think, 2017. So they're a pretty trustworthy firm. I mean, I have no reason to doubt the integrity of their audits. The concern with that audit, there's a few of them, is that it's quite narrow, and it was rolled out in a way that suggested it was a more sweeping and sort of momentous finding that I think it really was.
Sure, yeah.
I think, so first of all, just to run down some of the concerns with this, it was only looking at pre-built assessments used in early career candidates, or used for early career candidates And it did not apply to custom assessments, which represent a pretty significant slice of HireView's business as we understand it. It was not a comprehensive audit of HireView's use of algorithms generally. And the audit specifically mentioned that the case that was audited was not necessarily common or representative of HireView's business overall. So there's a lot of limitations on the scope of this audit. What the audit found, what the audit says it found anyway, is that it did not find any indications of bias in these pre-built assessments, or this specific class of pre-built assessments. And I'll read a passage. So it says, the top line finding was the assessments work as advertised with regard to fairness and bias issues. Orchid did not find any operational risks with respect to clients using them. And it looked at potential score gaps between demographic groups and did not identify any. So in this very narrow subset of HireView's pre-built assessments, it did not find bias issues. But it goes on to mention that it did not look at things like other protected classes, including, and this is key, disability status, because that is one of the primary concerns around these technologies, that they discriminate against persons with disabilities. So, and that's a limitation of the audit because that information is not necessarily collected typically during a job application process. So it wasn't able to audit that aspect of it. And it also, when it talked about measures that HireView could take to sort of ensure the integrity of algorithms, it said basically we took HireView at its word that it was implementing these reforms. And I understand certainly that is, again, a limit of an audit like this if the company structures it that way. But I would not necessarily take HireView at its word. So that's the read of that audit. It was interesting, and these third-party audits by reputable auditing firms are certainly something that companies should be doing and should be legally required. But it is not something that this particular audit did not fill me with confidence, because it was also released at the exact same time that HireView dropped facial recognition from its system, which to me signals that there may have been a broader audit conducted or a separate audit conducted or growing concerns within the company that this facial recognition component of its technology really was deeply problematic and was not functioning the way it was advertised and was prone to bias and so forth. So I wouldn't hang my hat on that audit.
Yeah, and that's something I think that's a good point to bring up, and that you kind of alluded to here. And with a lot of these third-party audits, I totally agree. It's great that they're doing them. I kind of wish that they were maybe, again, you're alluding to this was more of a legal requirement that they don't get to choose who does it or how it's done. In this case, obviously they did both, but there's other things like what audits didn't they share, right? I mean,
exactly. And actually, I'll mention something that's quite remarkable about this, which is when HireView published this audit and a press release talking about the change to its platform with facial analysis, it made the audit available to the public, but it made you go through its website, fill in your contact information, and certify that you were not going to share the audit with anyone else. So anyone can go and get it, but journalists can't disseminate it. I can't share it on Epic's website or anything like that, which to me is a red flag for how confident they are about the scope of that audit and what it really says about their technology.
Interesting. Okay, so do we have any data on how prevalent this higher tech technology is today? Like, I'm sure it's on the rise, whatever it is now. But how often it's being used, and even more so, like, do we have details on, is it prevalent in some industries more than others? It sounds like maybe, actually I don't know if it's used in new grads, new hires more than it is for experienced hires. What data, if any, do we have on this?
So I'm not a market expert, but I did read an analysis that said that in 2019 AI hiring was a $580 million industry. So it's big. We're not talking about a niche industry. By all accounts, it is on the rise and was on the rise before COVID and has certainly been on the rise during COVID because companies are not doing in-person interviews for the most part. My impression, and I also don't have hard data on this, but based on the clients that we know use HireView, is that it's a technology that appeals to large employers who hire at scale. So companies that are going to be screening hundreds of applicants for one or a few jobs, rather than, small employers that are able to more easily conduct a hiring process with less manpower. So I don't know sectorally like what industries it's more prevalent in than others, but I do think it's something that is especially common in large employers, and probably with entry-level jobs where there is maybe less attention to the individual qualifications of candidates.
Now, while we're here, I want to ask you a question, because you're probably in a perfect position to know this. And I think it's important for people to understand this, because I think a lot of this stuff is not well understood. But obviously, if you're doing this, my guess is we'll ask this later, but this is being done. You're being recorded, and at least roughly how this is operating. But today there's a lot of other sources of data out there, because in our capitalist society we've got crap tons of data on people. What other sources of data are hiring companies using as input for screening candidates?
It depends on the state, but because state laws vary on what employers can use.
Okay.
But they can certainly require your consent in many cases to obtain a credit check or conduct a background check before they can move forward with the hiring process. They could easily review your social media accounts. There have been reports of employers or prospective employers asking for passwords to social media accounts.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I don't think that's common, but it has happened. So
wow.
It's a scary practice.
Yeah.
They can use online reputation services. So not full background checks, but services that are just scanning for your web presence. And of course, all of these types of data sources raise privacy and fairness and reliability concerns, just like a higher view screening technology. So even if you set aside video-based screening, there are a lot of unsettling ways that employers can try to find information out about you.
Well, and I guess the degree to which some of that is automated is creepy. But I did a hire, back when I worked at Cisco and other Nortel and Lucid and other places. I guess maybe Nortel, social media wasn't a thing back then. But certainly when I did a lot of hiring for Cisco, I did a lot of campus stuff, and one of the first things I would do in prep for anything was go find their social media accounts. And in a lot of cases, they'd be pretty tame, or every once in a while you run across the case. So it's like a Finsta account, where people have, two different accounts. They've got their public one that they hopefully you would find, and another one that they kind of keep to friends only. And so it's just kind of a thing today. But I bet, I'm sure that a lot of the same hiretech is being used to automate a lot of those processes as well. And probably the online reputation services too, and all those things are looking at that and snarfing up that data.
Yeah, absolutely. I will confess I'm not an expert in those technologies for the most part, but I'm certain AI is being deployed in all those contexts.
Yeah. So, and here's the flip side of that, of course. As soon as we start getting to automated stuff, there's gaming that system. So I read in the Washington Post in prep for this that there's technologies are becoming so pervasive at schools, like universities, as part of their hiring programs to help you find jobs, are actually training the job seekers to, quote, how to look and speak for best results, unquote. So, can these systems be gamed? Do we know that they were, it seems like that's the flip side of this coin every time. And on that little tease, we will break and pick it up again here next week. And, some of the other things we're going to talk about next week are, trying to play a little devil's advocate. Is it humans aren't great at hiring either. Humans get tired. Humans have biases. Humans have bad days. They have prejudices. Are there any upsides to trying to use a computer to screen candidates? What is the ideal use of something like this? If I'm a huge company and I've got to potentially screen hundreds of candidates, is there value to this? So, we'll take a look at both sides of this. We'll talk about that next week. After these couple interviews, we'll, of course, have a news show, and obviously never a shortage of things to talk about. But, I'll kind of catch you up on this Microsoft Exchange hack. I told you about it last week, but, man, it is just the gift that keeps on giving. It's been exploited it's a free-for-all because there are so many of these Microsoft Exchange servers out there, and these bugs are so bad. Even though the IT departments all know about these things, it's hard at a big company to apply upgrades sometimes. And so the bad guys are just flooding the system, trying to hack these places as quickly as possible before these things get patched. So it's horrible. I mean, man, after SolarWinds, this could be even bigger, even have more impacts. It's crazy. So we'll talk about that and several other things. Also, just got in the mail from Europe a signed copy of a book called Privacy is Power by Carissa Veliz. And she is really sharp. I'm really loving this book. I'm going to be doing a book review on that, and I'll talk a little bit more about it here. Probably look more for my blog at firewallstonestopdragons.com for a more in-depth review. But I'm really liking this book, and I think it's going to end up being one of the ones I recommend a lot. And I got a signed copy because I reached out to her directly, and she and I have been emailing back and forth some and been trying to get her on the show. But she is slammed. This book is really popular. It was released in Europe first. It's actually not even coming out in the U.S. until April 6th, so kind of got an advanced copy there. But hopefully, anyway, when things settle down for her, maybe in a few months, maybe even toward the end of the year, hopefully we can get her to come on the show and talk about this. Again, we got some great new stuff on Patreon. If you want to be a patron, you can directly interact with me on Discord. I'm already chatting with a few people there now. It's a lot of fun. You can have a little more influence and say on what I do on the podcast, and maybe what I do for my next book even, or some video tutorials I'm hoping to make. And if you're at all interested in how this podcast is put together, when you sign up, you can check out my half-hour-long video on the making of the podcast. And that's just the beginning. We got all sorts of great cool stuff coming up. So definitely check that out at patreon.com, Patreon. Just search on Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. All right, that's it. We'll keep it short this week. Last week was really long. So thanks again for tuning in, everybody. Tune in again, of course, next week. And if you just want to subscribe, that way you definitely won't miss it. I'm really super excited. I'm hopefully going to be getting my vaccine soon here in North Carolina, where I am located. They are going to be opening it up to my particular demographic next week. So I don't know how quickly I'll be able to get one, but man, I'll be all over that. Can't wait to get my vaccine and get back to living a normal life. And I know everybody out there wants to do the same thing. So the way we do that is we all get vaccinated. So get signed up as soon as you can, and please help others do it as well. In some places, it's a really arcane, hard to follow process. So when you figure it out for yourself, help other people do it too. There is a light at the end of this tunnel, folks, and we will get there. Just got to hang in there just a little while longer. Okay, so until next week, as always, everybody, stay safe out there and don't get caught with your drawbridge down.